Chapter 7 of Baiting the Bears by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7, in which Phil hears good news. Phil went home that afternoon like one in a dream. He didn't wait for Marie, and that was a bad sign. The girl noticed his preoccupied manner just before he put on his hat and coat, and when he passed her without a word or a look, she was certain something unusual was on the tapis, and it worried her not a little. "Something has happened to him, sure," she said to herself. "Something quite out of the ordinary. He didn't even say goodbye to me." When she passed 3 of the clerks on her way out, she heard one say something about the panic on the floor of the exchange that afternoon. "I heard Reese say that the boss unloaded 15,000 of GW&O onto the syndicate at 2:30, and that they couldn't take in the last block," the speaker was saying. "Consequently, the bears jumped on the road like a pack of jackals, and the shares tumbled at once. There must be a whole lot of people in the soup tonight." "I wonder," thought Marie, "if Phil Thorne was interested in that stock. He didn't say anything to me about going into another deal. Well, I mean to ask him about it tomorrow." Of course, Dick Ovens knew all about the smash in GW&O. He rushed across the Lockwoods to meet Phil as soon as he could get away from the office, but he missed his friend by a minute. "I'm afraid he's got caught in the general ruin," breathed Dick with a feeling of sympathy for Phil. "He said he didn't intend to sell till the price reached 85, and the stock never got above 84 3/8. It tumbled to 82 when the first attempt was made to break the price. For a moment it looked as if the end had come, but the click came to time, gobbled the 2 big blocks of stock which had been fired on the market, and the price reacted to 84 in less than 3 minutes. But when those 5,000 lots were dumped onto him, it was all up Salt River." After supper, Dick rushed over to Phil's house, but found his chum had gone out, and Mrs. Thorne didn't know where he had gone. The truth was, Phil expected Dick would be after him to learn how things stood, and he didn't have the heart to talk about the matter. He had no idea to what extent he had been affected by the crash. The papers informed him that the GW&O had not actually gone under until 10 or 15 minutes after he had sent in his order to sell the stock, but he couldn't tell whether Brown had disposed of it or not before the drop. There was just the possibility that he had, in which case he was all to the good, but until he heard from his broker he couldn't tell for sure. Such a reflection seemed too good to be true. So he went to the theater to see the performance in the hope that it would distract his mind from the unpleasant subject. Most persons would have sat down and worried themselves sick over the situation, but Phil has a stronger nerve than that. After the first shock had passed over, he began to feel like himself again, though the reflection that he probably had lost anywhere from $10,000 to $23,000 was bound to recur to him again and again. "What was the matter with you last night, Mr. Thorne?" asked Marie of Phil as soon as she saw him the next morning. The boy looked at her a moment before he replied, "I intended to give you a surprise. I've been interested in GW&O these 3 weeks past. I had an opportunity to sell out at 84 yesterday, when I should have cleared $18,000. "You don't mean it! Why, how much did you buy? 800 shares? It must have taken all your money to get that much, even on the usual margin." "It did, all but $500. Well, I'm afraid I held on a moment too long in my effort to clear $20,000. The market went to pieces half an hour before the exchange closed." "Oh, Mr. Thorne, I'm so sorry for you," and her eyes and manner showed it. "Thank you for your sympathy, Miss Marie. I appreciate it very much, but I have just the ghost of a show left." "Have you?" she said, her eyes suddenly kindling with pleasure. "Yes, though I dare not build much hope on it. 10 minutes before the crash, I telephoned my broker to sell. If the order reached him from his office in time, the country is safe," he said with a slight smile. "Otherwise, I hope and pray that it did," she said earnestly as she took her place at her Remington. "You're very good to say so, Miss Marie," replied Phil with some feeling in his voice. "I know I have one real friend, at least, in the office." "I have always been your friend, Mr. Thorne," she said, not looking up. "I'm sure you have, and I hope the opportunity may present itself some day for me to prove that I am also your true friend." A little before 10, Phil went to the phone and called up his broker. "Mr. Brown is engaged. What do you wish to know?" came back the answer. "I want to find out if Mr. Brown sold my GW&O stock yesterday afternoon, and at what figure." "I'll let you know in a moment. Hold the wire." Phil waited with the receiver to his ear several anxious moments before a sharp "Hello!" reached him. "Well?" he said. Your 800 shares was sold at 84, just before the stock tumbled. Allow me to congratulate you. Check and statement will be forwarded as soon as settlement has been made. Goodbye." Phil scarcely heard the final words of the message. At any rate, they made no impression on his mind. All he knew was he was worn out. He was a clear $18,000 winner on the deal, which had almost been a Waterloo. The reaction had been almost as much of a shock to his nerves as the first tidings of reverse. He walked back to his desk like a new boy. Scribbling some words on a slip of paper, he asked Willie, the office boy, to take it over to Miss Minturn. She read, tore it into small bits and droplet particles into her wastebasket. "I'm awful glad," she said to herself as she went on with her work. As Phil opened the door of the reception room on his way to lunch that day, he ran full tilt against Morris Rowland, who was entering with a rush at the same moment. "Get out of my way, confound you!" roared the broker, who seemed to be under a strain of intense excitement. He brushed Phil aside like a feather, and the boy went down on the floor in a most undignified way, while Rowland, paying no attention to Enoch, who had come forward to ask his business there, dashed open the door of Mr. Lockwood's private office and entered, closing the door with a bang. Phil got up and walked over to where a whisk broom hung against the wall near the indicator, and began to brush himself off. He couldn't help hearing Rowland's voice inside raised to a high, menacing pitch. "I wonder what struck him now," thought Phil. Then he recollected that Dick had told him his boss was deeply involved in GW&O. "By George," he muttered, "I'll bet he's been hit good and hard. Well, he hasn't got my sympathy. It never does a man any good to insult an employee. He rubbed it into me, so it's a satisfaction to know that he gets it in the neck once in a while." As Phil hung up the brush, he heard Rowland say in a voice hoarse with passion, "You've got to make good my loss right here, Lockwood, or I'll blow your brains out in less than 2 seconds. I'm a desperate man, and I don't care a cent for the consequences. Do you understand?" "There's something doing in there for fair," muttered the boy, thinking rapidly, "and I guess it's my duty to take a hand in it." He threw open the private office door, to the amazement of Enoch, who would have interfered had he been near enough, and rushed into the room. Morris Rowland, his eyes blazing with a murderous determination, was bending over Mr. Lockwood's desk while he held a cocked revolver within 2 inches of the banker's head. End of chapter 7.